Well, welcome. I'm John Fischetti,
Hi, I'm Scott Imig.
and we'd like to welcome you to the first of our podcast series that we're entitling We Will Get Through This, Transformative Leadership for Disruptive Times. And Scott, it's a real pleasure to work with you as always, and I think we're on a journey that we hope our watchers and listeners might join us with in this really amazing time that we found ourselves all across the planet.
It's a very unusual time, and it's important that we as educational leaders, we build a community and we all come together and start sharing ideas. So John, I think the purpose of this podcast, as we've discussed it, is to share, reflect, and create opportunities for dialogue among school leaders all around the world.
Yeah, we know that many of you, and we're talking particularly to principals, deputy principals, and middle-level leaders, but anybody running an organization that's going through this disruption, you're guiding transformation in the organizations, and the change process is being disrupted, almost potentially ground to a halt by the current COVID-19 reality. Most traditional school settings and the structures that serve them are actually in a state of massive disruption to the point we're really not sure what it's going to look like on the other side. But I think you and I believe if we choose to seize this moment and use formats like this, both video and audio for the podcast, this chaotic time actually could turn to a time of reflection.
I think that's right. Transformative leaders may be able to use this time to revamp, recoup, regenerate, and reboot the journeys that you've started in your schools. This is that time for reflection. It's that time to think about why do we do what we do.
Absolutely. Most of us are accepting a notion of success for all, and we'll get into in our second or third episode around the notion of what is transformation. But you're accepting this transformation as a guidepost for helping reinvent education, and particularly schooling as we know it, particularly in this hyper interconnected world, which has absolutely found itself part of the issue, part of the problem and solution of where we are. And through these occasional audio and video podcasts, both Scott and myself really want to prepare you for today, but as importantly for tomorrow, and how we can use this time in what I guess is rightly called the new normal to kind of effectively build a network of colleagues.
Well, so we're hoping to join you on occasion, hopefully a couple times a week if we can make this work. But we thought it might be nice to introduce ourselves first. So John, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. This first episode is designed to give you a sense of what we want to do, a sense of us, and then we really want to include you in the conversation through the comments and sections where we can provide links and avenues for resources to each other. So we'll just start that. We don't want to make this about us. We really want to make this about you. But my work at the University of Newcastle here in Australia is the last 7 years. I come from an education background and a leadership background over the last 20 years or so, helping to drive change in higher education, particularly as we move to various new technologies that really help us think about what teaching and learning is and do differently. My belief is everything starts with the talent of the people and the real wonderful opportunities we have, because the assets we have at a school or a university are really our people, and to be really student-centered and student-focused, that we're here for learning as a primary reason for being, and it's just an honor to be with you. I think we'll put a few snippets in as we go along the way. I was born in New York City, grew up in the state of Virginia, have lived a long time in the states of Kentucky and North Carolina, and a little bit in Louisiana. But the opportunities here in Australia are really to think on a broad scope about how we do learning and how schools might look differently. And Scott and I both look forward to sharing resources with you that we've created, but we're going to learn with you along this way.
We certainly are. I've actually had the privilege of working with John for more than a dozen years. We both were from North Carolina. That's where we met each other. I've been in Australia now for about 5 years.
It's crazy.
It's a pretty remarkable place, and have enjoyed it. Picked up my 3 children and my wife, and we came here, and it's been an amazing experience. And I think the challenge of picking up and moving around the world can be confronting, and that's part of we're going to tap into that ability to look at change and look at personal change and internalize it and figure out how do we actually take our own journeys and we learn from each other. And I've been an educator for almost 20 years. One of the big areas that I spend a lot of time working on is coaching. And coaching to me is really about helping people learn to help themselves. And so again, looking forward to working with you and learning with you.
We've titled this, We Will Get Through This, and we're going to use it at the beginning and end of every episode. We want you to know from the bottom of our hearts that we will get through this. This is a strange reality we're in, where a virus that is really serious for the vulnerable and maybe not so serious for others has shut down planet Earth and the economies of virtually every country. In doing so, we could create a sort of despair mantra about just holding on. But we want to propose that this is a time that we can reflect, a chance to really rethink, and particularly how you might use the vehicles of teleconferencing with your executive teams, your leadership teams, to boost them during this time. Because there's an opportunity of a little bit of time over the next weeks or so for us to help think together how we could use this to maybe get something done in the middle of 2020 that never would have gotten on the radar and the running around of everything else. Now, all of our sympathies are out to everyone who's gone through a loss or will go through a loss, because this is not a pretty picture. But what we want to do is flip it if we can and take the time each day to focus on one aspect that we might do to drive our teams forward, to rethink, and maybe use this chance to reimagine what we could do differently when we get back to whatever normal will be. I have a feeling it won't be the same normal that we've been used to. So this first episode, Scott, we really want to focus on how to take care of yourself. And each episode will have a slightly different theme, and we'll let you know what that is. But besides our introduction and really pushing this, we will get through this mantra, why don't you start us off on what you think school leaders in particular can do to take care of themselves during this really complex time?
And this is such an unusual time in world history, in that as school leaders, your general default is you want to get involved. You want to put your hands on the problem and you want to fix it. And this is one of those rare situations where one of the best things that we can do is stay away from each other. You know,
it's really wild.
It's kind of ironic. And even John and I
we're almost a code here.
We're intentionally trying to stay far apart from each other. But just because you were physically not in the same space with your educators and with your students and with your colleagues, there's a lot you can be doing. But in order for you to be effective, you really have to be okay yourself before you can start really helping others. And so I think that is the theme of this first episode, is what are those things you can be doing. So there's, as you know, one of the things that we do as leaders of organizations is we tend to internalize everything. We look at all the issues and we bring them in and we try and solve them. And when there's a huge pipeline coming in, it can be absolutely overwhelming. And so there's a part of the brain called the amygdala. And what that does is it causes your brain to actually put you into a state where you almost shut down. It's overwhelming.
It's the basic fight or flight instinct. It's that little being pod that sits right in the heart of the brain that controls and pretty much determines whether we're going to be an advanced being or not.
Yes.
Fight or flight is the basic default situation of most basic beings.
Exactly right. And it's that basic fight or flight mechanism that can overwhelm everything else, which we normally want that to happen when you're faced, with the bear in the woods or the snake on the path. That's good. But in a situation like this, we need to get beyond that. So the way you get beyond that, one of the best things you can do is you can begin voicing what you're feeling. So as a leader, if you're overwhelmed, don't let yourself fall into that place where you can't process. Start to talk to yourself. You can talk out loud. You can talk to your significant other. And you can talk about, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I think these emotions mean. And simply doing that allows you to start thinking as opposed to reacting. So that's a simple thing.
Right. And I think we've got to keep in mind that while we didn't sign up for what this is, that generations in the past have had it much worse.
Yes.
Except for those vulnerable, particularly the elderly and those potentially with chronic lung disease, those coming back from cancer treatments who we got to protect by staying away from each other and trying to get this thing licked, is we will get through this.
Yes.
And in that, it's a different spirit than if this were the plague of the past, which there was nothing we could have done about, and basically it was waiting around for the Grim Reaper. This is the opposite of that. We will get through this. And so I think accepting that with what you just said will allow us to take each day as an opportunity and not a burden, and to maybe rewire that amygdala to be responsive to positive change, not just reaction to the panic that so many of our colleagues are in right now, to be honest with you.
That's exactly right. It's amazing what you can do if you simply take the time to process what you're experiencing and what you're feeling. Talk it out. We were talking about this simple strategy where you can actually look at all the things you're feeling and see if you can articulate them and put them down on paper.
Yeah.
What are all the stressors you're feeling? And then try and put an asterisk next to those things you can actually do something about. And if you can do something about it, why don't you pick one thing on that list and say, all right, I'm going to deal with this, because it gives you a sense of control and it helps you actually take your world back.
I think it's going to be important also because many of you are driving teams who need your leadership to be able to exude your positive reality that we're going to be fine, and issue challenges to the teams each day for some of this content that you're describing and that we'll get to in just a minute. Don't forget your role model for the teams, and the way in which we communicate in this fashion and in email, it's going to have to change without the non-verbal communication stuff of being in the room together. But we have to exude a positive attitude, and it will rub off on our staff, it will rub off on our children, and we'll be okay if we can just settle down. We're also not all the time having to be hunkering down in worry mode. And do you have some resources you were thinking that might help us calm ourselves a bit?
Certainly. One of the things, a challenge or a strategy I might encourage you to do is at the end of each day, when you're getting ready to lay down and your mind's going like crazy, that's completely understandable. But can you pick one thing? Can you remember one thing during the day that was wonderful? Can you remember one thing during the day where you had that interaction with a colleague that maybe you hadn't had, where you had the interaction with your son or your daughter or your significant other? What was that moment? Because if you can fixate on those positives, that keeps you in that positive frame of mind, and then it will allow you to, it will permeate your work. It will permeate your thinking.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
I think the other things we'd like you to do, and we'll post some resources, and we'd like to invite you to do as well, is we really want you to take care of yourself in the exercise mode. You may have, for the first time ever in the middle of a year, a chance to have a goal. And I'm not asking you to do anything your GP, if you could get to them, would tell you not to do. But check with her anyway. There's a telemed you might be able to do. Go forward and try to start an exercise regimen. Most of us are allowed around the world to get out with our immediate family, those we're sequestered or quarantined with. But to have a goal that this week we're going to walk a kilometer or a mile. And we're not going to complain about it. We might have a glass of water. Lace up the shoes, let's go. And the goal by the next month, we're going to walk 5 kilometers without huffing and puffing too badly. Now, again, don't do this in a dangerous area, or if the government in your area has said don't go out of the house. But for most of us, we've been wanting to get going, and moving is the best thing. There are a number of apps, and we'll bring on some guests in several episodes to share with us some of those apps that you may already have and can share with us that'll help you even keep track of some exercise. You don't have a proper gym in your house, there's a lot of things around your house that can turn into things that you can lift and you can move. We can do some interval training. But again, don't over exude, but you may make it a family event, or you may challenge your team to keep track of the steps and make sure you get to your 10,000 or whatever the goal is for each day.
There was a story yesterday that I read about an individual who's just run a marathon on his patio. So it can be done.
That's going nowhere fast. That's a lot of going. And so I think if you have that goal, it'll also keep you positive. We got to get your cardio up. Remember, young people need an hour a day minimum, but they need to have it in a different way. So create some competition that's healthy, create some goals for yourself, but equally around eating. When I was at the University of Virginia, where Scott did his PhD, there was this thing called the freshman 15, like when you were a first-year university student and living away from home and eating in the cafeteria, you tended to gain 10 to 15 pounds or 6 or 7 kilos during your first semester because you were just eating too much bread rolls and all that stuff. I don't know if it happened to you. It didn't really happen to me, but I've heard the rumors. And I think we could get the COVID-20 if we're not careful, Scott, where people are going to gain 20 pounds or 10 or so kilos inadvertently from nervous energy, snacking on chips, and basically having too much time on their hands. We're going to encourage you to set a healthy goal. It's not only calories intakes, it's about eating right. And there's plenty of chance still in much of the world to get fresh food or to choose well, and to even use this as a lesson with your families at home. You might even try to change a habit about what you do for snacking and see if you can't take that on. So a little exercise and a little bit, of regimen around being a positive, really contributor and attempting to take some of the worry out, we might get in a situation where we could be okay during this time to get to some of the topics that are going to be the heart of this series. And that is, how do we now, when we get back to it, whatever form that is, how do we really drive change in our schools? That's real meaningful change. I think, Scott, for example, the fact that many jurisdictions are parking their end of year, end of grade, in Australia, the NAPLAN test for this year. I think it's a refreshing pause for a lot of reasons. It takes the pressure off, but it might ask us, say, what do we really want from schools? What's the assessment that would get us indication that teaching and learning is happening? Maybe when we get back to it, we're not so sure the way we were doing it is right, convincing ministers and parliaments and legislatures that there's another way to define learning and maybe borrow some of the great models around to put in place. So we got to keep you strong during this time. We got to keep you optimistic. We got to keep you healthy and also sort of excited that if this is our burden, we will get through this. What do you think the next phase of our work with our colleagues will be? What will the next episode, Scott? We're talking about sort of the notion of defining transformation in our next episode. Does that still make sense to you to do?
I think that makes sense. I think today was really about getting you in a good place and recognizing that you're really important to your team. And so it's important that you have your head in the right space and physically you're in the right space because you're really important and you're really needed to your entire school community.
So we want to issue a task at the end of each episode that you don't have to do, by the way. You can modify or make it better. What's the task for this episode?
Well, I think there's a physical task, which I think the physical task is let's pick one thing that you can do right now at home that will get you started on a better regimen. So it could be that you don't get out a lot typically. You're not a big walker or a jogger. Let's start small. How about a K? How about if you just do 1K, it may be around your yard or it may be around your neighborhood. Again, it depends on what you're allowed to do.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And maybe really do a diet plan and even help your family, if you're living with your family, create a meal system where the kids are participating in this as well. Let's create healthy meals out of what's ever in the cupboard or the pantry and get anything we've been able to stock up a bit. It looks like many places in Australia, you must have a lot of rice because there wasn't any rice in the store when I was there. What's this about rice being the shortage? But I think you can make a lot of dishes with rice and maybe plan ahead and figure out what that is.
So if you do the physical task, if you come up with something and try to get started on that, watch what you eat and be mindful. Really think about what you're feeling, articulate what you're feeling, and find the positive.
When you were just talking, I remembered to breathe. And I think that's what we'd like to you as school leaders in the middle of a busy school year. You're not allowed to breathe. Maybe this break will allow you to take that breath and say, when we're back to it, whatever that looks like, we want to breathe again and breathe with our children and really enjoy this journey, not just the destination. We want to help our most vulnerable young people as well feel okay. And in future episodes, we'll talk about our year 11 and 12 students creating senior projects. And we might guide them to how to do that without any cost and without a lot of high tech. So they might have evidence after this of how they've spent their time. There's lots of great ideas to share. We just want you to know that from the bottom of our hearts, Scott and I are committed to helping you understand that we will get through this. Our further episodes will have maybe better music, maybe less construction noise behind, but we look forward to your feedback and in sharing our authentic experiences, colleagues going through the journey with you.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.